Chapter 1. Born beneath twin suns, bound by dust and chains, the stars did not sing the night he was born. They held their breath on the edge of the outer rim, where the force lies thin as desert wind. There opened a wound in time, small, breathing, helpless, a child. No father, no ceremony, no skyfire to proclaim his name. Only heat, only dust, only the cracked breath of Shmi, whispering to a void that offered no reply. He was not born. He was placed by hands unseen, in a womb made sacred by silence. The force stirred, not gently, not warmly, but with hunger. It coiled around the infant, not as a blessing, but as a tether. His life was not his own. From the moment his lungs first screamed, the echoes rippled outward, whispering to both Jedi and Sith alike. The boy bore no name of legend. He bore no title but slave. Yet even the chains of Watto's junkyard empire could not contain the pulse within him. The trembling hum of potential, raw and blinding. They called him Anakin. But the Force knew another name. Beneath the twin suns of Tatooine he grew, skin burned by heat, heart hardened by survival. He knew kindness, yes, in the soft eyes of his mother, in the laughter of small companions. But kindness, too, is fleeting in a world ruled by coin and cruelty. Each night he dreamed of skies beyond sand. He built machines not just to function, but to fly, to escape. What child learns engineering before language? What slave speaks to circuitry like song? The Force whispered in every motion of his fingers. It coiled in the circuits he carved. It sparked in every bolt he tightened. Untrained, unknowing, but guided by something older than instruction. A ghost hand on his shoulder. But the Force is not a gift. It is a curse disguised in power. Even as he raced his Padrasa through canyon winds, even as he defied death with speed no human should match, shadows stirred. They watched him. Sith and Jedi alike turned their unseen gaze toward the boy, not for who he was, but for what he might become. Prophecy, the chosen one. But prophecy is not hope. It is a chain of a different kind. And no one asked the child if he wished to be chosen. When the Jedi came, cloaked in peace, their sabers sheathed in doctrine, they saw him and recoiled. Too old, too passionate, too dangerous, and yet too powerful to be left behind. Qui-Gon Jinn, the defiant one, saw not danger, but design. He believed the boy was born of the Force, a virgins, a fulcrum. He begged the council to look, to listen, to understand. But the Jedi, wrapped in ancient codes and the illusion of order, did not see a child. They saw imbalance, a future they could not control. And the Sith saw a mirror in the hidden depths of the galaxy far. From Tatooine's suns, a phantom cloaked in the skin of a chancellor turned his gaze upon the boy. He smiled, not with joy, but with hunger. For power recognizes power. The Sith did not question who the child was. They understood. The Force had offered up a vessel, pure and unsullied, to orders. One child, neither seeking to save, both seeking to shape. And so he was taken. Not freed, no, never freed, only exchanged from a slave's collar to a Padawan's braid, from the dirt of the outer rim to the marble silence of the Jedi Temple. One prison traded for another. The stars did not rejoice, they dimmed, for they had seen it before. Hope is always brightest just before it burns. In his new life, Anakin studied peace, but breathed fire. He learned control, but seethed beneath it. His hands obeyed, but his dreams did not. The other children feared his temper, envied his talent. Masters praised his potential, but whispered of danger when he passed. The force within him was not calm. It surged like a sea confined behind stone. Every meditation was a storm contained. Every lesson was a chain. He longed not to serve, but to save, to protect, to never feel helpless again. And that is where the dark begins. Not in hatred, but in fear. A child born without a father, offered up to a temple that feared him, and a galaxy already turning to war. This is where the tale begins, not with glory, but with dread, not with destiny, but with silence. For the chosen one has been claimed, and the force, ancient, amoral, devouring watches in stillness, and beneath twin suns, a mother watches the stars grow distant. Her son has gone to the heavens. But the heavens do not give back what they take. He is gone, and something else is beginning to wake. Chapter 2. The Phantom Will of the Force. The temple stood silent in the heart of Coruscant, towering, gleaming, blind. Its spires reached toward stars that no longer sang. Its walls echoed not with wisdom, but with the weight of unspoken fear. Jedi passed through its sacred halls like ghosts of a forgotten age, draped in serenity, yet hollow inside. They taught peace. They practiced war. They spoke of the Force as balance. But balance, too, can be a lie. And in the shadow of that lie stood a boy, Anakin Skywalker, no longer clothed in rags, no longer racing through boiling canyons, and yet still shackled, still suffocating beneath the gaze of those who could not understand him. They measured him in midichlorians. They debated his future in whispers. They tested his patience with questions they did not know how to answer. He stood before them, 9 years old, brilliant, trembling, and the Force screamed within him. But they did not listen to the scream. They heard only the echo of prophecy. He is too old. His fear runs deep. Clouded, this boy's future is, yes, clouded, but not by darkness, by their own failure to see what the Force itself had become. For the Force was no longer clear. It had twisted, shifted, bent beneath the weight of centuries. No longer pure light or pure dark, but muddled, uncertain, fractured. The Jedi called themselves guardians of peace, but they were no longer listening, not to the galaxy, not to the cries of the dying, not even to the will of the Force. Only one heard. Qui-Gon Jinn, a master out of step with the Order, too bold, too free, too aware. He saw the boy and recognized the tremor in time. He believed in the prophecy. He believed in Anakin. But belief alone is not enough to stop a blade. And darkness, cloaked in the flesh of a Sith forgotten, moved through the underworld. Darth Maul, a shadow reborn from ashes, horned and burning with hatred, struck from beyond the veil. And on Naboo, that beautiful planet of green hills and gold palaces, Qui-Gon Jinn fell, struck down, silenced, and with him the last voice that trusted the boy. Anakin stood alone again, not in chains this time, but in robes that did not fit. He watched the flames devour his master. He did not cry. He burned the grief inward where it could twist freely. Obi-Wan Kenobi, noble young, unready, took him as Padawan, out of duty, out of loyalty, but not out of faith. Their bond was forged not in love, but in loss, and the Force watched, unmoved, even as the galaxy hailed a queen, even as victory was declared. Something dark had been unleashed. The Sith had returned, not with armies, not with banners, but with patience, with masks, with voices that smiled. The Jedi celebrated their triumph, blind to the serpent they dined beside. They could not see the Chancellor's hands guiding fate, could not hear the laughter behind his words palpitate. The Sith who wore the face of trust, he leaned close to the boy. He spoke gently, not of codes, but of freedom, not of patience, but of destiny. He asked no permission, he simply watched. Anakin found comfort in him, the way a drowning man finds comfort in still water. Unaware, it is too deep, and the dreams began, not of fire this time, but of silence, of halls without light, of voices calling his name, not in praise, but in fear. He woke with tears. He woke with clenched fists. He began to question. Why must Jedi not love? Why must they not protect with passion? Why must a boy leave his mother to rot in slavery, just to honor the code? The code, always the code. 1,000 generations bound in sacred law. But no law could save her. No law could calm the storm he carried inside. He visited her in secret thoughts. He whispered apologies into the stars. But stars do not answer. And somewhere, far beneath the temple, the Force stirred. It had not spoken clearly in many years, but now it began to murmur again, not in the voice of light, not in the clarity of truth, but in riddles, in contradiction. Was Anakin Skywalker the chosen one, or merely the vessel through which the Force would purge its imbalance? He trained, he learned the lightsaber forms, he meditated, he obeyed, but his heart beat to a different rhythm, a rhythm the Jedi could not hear, a rhythm the Sith would exploit. And so the stage was set, a child stolen from sand, a Jedi who doubted, a Sith in the shadows, and a prophecy no one truly understood. The Force was shifting again, breathing again, and in its breath, the name Anakin became something other. The Jedi called him hope. The Sith called him opportunity. But the Force called him sacrifice. He did not know it yet. He still laughed. He still dreamed of racing stars. He still believed there was such a thing as good. But already the path was forming beneath his feet, a path paved in contradiction, in fear, in fire. And no one, not even the Council, not even the boy, could see where it led. Only the Force knew, and it did not weep. It simply waited. Chapter 3. The Cradle of the Clone Wars. The galaxy convulsed. What began as whispers in shadow became shouts of fire. Systems fractured. Planets chose sides. Peace unraveled like old cloth, thread by thread, belief by belief. And from that unraveling rose war, not sudden, but orchestrated. A symphony of chaos conducted by a Sith cloaked in velvet robes. The Jedi became generals, the Council became commanders, and the Chosen One, still unknowing, was given the blade of war. This was not what they had trained for. They had spoken of harmony, of service, of serenity. But now they gave orders to soldiers who had no mothers, who obeyed without question, whose faces were all the same. Clones, born for one purpose, to die under command, and the Jedi obeyed. The temple, once filled with quiet learning, now echoed with war strategy. Meditation rooms became war rooms. Padawans learned to kill before they learned to forgive. Anakin Skywalker thrived. He was not like the others. He did not fear attachment. He led with heart, not code. And in battle, heart wins wars. They called him the hero with no fear. They sang his name across systems. But he was no hero. He was a storm wrapped in sunlight, and storms always break. The war elevated him, ranked him, revered him, and it also twisted him. He saved lives, yes. He protected, he inspired, but he also learned to destroy with frightening precision. He killed without hesitation. His power grew unchecked, not just with his saber, but within the Force itself. He began to see things, feel things, ripples in time, flashes of futures that had not yet happened, screams that had not yet escaped the throat. He dreamt of her Padma. One secret he kept from the Order, the one truth he clung to when all others failed. They had married in silence, far from Coruscant, far from judgment, far from eyes that would not understand. Their love was a sin, but to Anakin it was salvation. He fought not for the Republic, not for the Council, not even for peace. He fought for her, and that made him dangerous. The more he feared losing her, the more the Force fed that fear. The more it whispered of inevitable pain, death, betrayal, loss. His dreams twisted, her face pale, her breath gone, her belly full with life not yet born, but already marked by the same doom that haunted him. He begged the Jedi for answers. They told him to let go, let go. How does one release the sun from the sky? How does one unlove? He turned inward, he turned restless, and the war pressed on. Each planet conquered was a prayer unanswered. Each victory won was another grain in the hourglass of his doom. And always, always, the Chancellor smiled Palpatine, no longer just a political figure. He had become a presence, always near, always speaking, always watching. He praised Anakin, called him exceptional, defended his emotions, whispered doubts about the Council. Gently, carefully, he began to uncurl the Jedi's grip on the boy's mind. The seed had already been planted. Now it took root. The Council, wary of Anakin's closeness to power, withheld rank, denied mastery, doubted his readiness. But they did not doubt the prophecy. They clung to it like a rope in a burning house, and Anakin began to feel the rope tightening round his neck. He trusted no one fully, not Obi-Wan, who followed the rules, not the Council, who refused him, not even himself. The Force had grown, strange in his hands, not clear, not kind. He could move ships with his will, crush bones with a breath, but he could not stop the visions. He could not save the woman he loved from the death that stalked her in dreams. War made him a legend, but prophecy made him a prisoner. He began to wonder, was the prophecy wrong, or was he simply not enough? In the shadows of the temple, in whispers between strikes of lightning, he began to crave more, not peace, not wisdom, but power, not for conquest, for salvation. And so the cradle rocked, the war meant to end quickly, stretched on endlessly. Systems burned. Republic turned to empire in all but name. The Jedi grew weary. The dark side, no longer hidden, began to bleed into everything, and in the heart of it stood a boy once born beneath twin suns, now a man wrapped in robes of fire, bound by visions and held aloft by the crumbling illusion of destiny. He still believed he could save her, but belief, in the end, is just another kind of blindness. And the Force did not speak. It only watched and waited because it knew. The Chosen One does not end the war. The Chosen One is the war. Chapter 4. Dreams that bleed into the living sleep became a battlefield. When Anakin closed his eyes, the Force did not bring peace. It showed him death, vivid, intimate, merciless. He saw her, Padmam, his wife, his light, dying dot over and over, her breath strangled, her fingers reaching, her body twisted in labor, and always his hands stained, trembling, empty. He woke. In darkness, always in darkness, breath ragged, skin cold, chest hollow. He looked at her as she slept beside him, beautiful, unaware, already lost. He did not tell her the truth. He could not, because deep within he knew the truth. The Force was not warning him. It was condemning him. The dreams were not visions. They were chains. Visions are windows into fate. But these bled into reality. He began to believe he was not watching the future. He was causing it, and so he fought it. Not with peace, not with meditation, but with fear, with desperation, with rage that bloomed beneath the skin like fire trapped beneath ice. He turned to the Jedi. They offered silence. They spoke of detachment, of acceptance, of letting go. But how does one release the only person who makes the galaxy bearable? Anakin listened, and he obeyed. Outwardly, inwardly, he burned. The Jedi did not understand. They never had. They feared his attachment, mistaking love for weakness. But love was never his weakness. It was his only restraint. Without pardon, he feared what would remain. The war had already devoured too much of him, his innocence, his trust, his childhood. He had taken lives. He had wielded the Force as a weapon, not as a guide. And now, it showed him her death and called it destiny, no dot. He would not let her die, not like his mother, because he had failed her. Yes, the boy who left, Shmi on Tatooine, had returned too late. He had found her body broken and breathless, tied to stakes by monsters, her final words whispered into the dust. He had buried her in sand, and in that same sand, something inside him had fractured. He remembered the rage, the slaughter, the scream of his saber, the way death came to those who had taken her, not as justice, but as wrath. He had killed not just men, he had killed children, entire tribes, and the Force had gone silent. Now it whispered again, but not in warning, in invitation. He began to sense it, just beyond the veil of the known, a power that could stop death, that could reshape fate. The Jedi feared it. They had locked it away in forbidden archives. They spoke of the dark side as corruption, but never as understanding. And into that silence, a voice emerged, soft, steady, seductive. The Chancellor, Palpatine, no longer just a politician, no longer just a mentor, now a confidant, a guide. He spoke of ancient Sith legends, of a dark lord called Plagueis, who had learned to twist life itself, to create, to preserve. He could keep the ones he cared about from dying. Those words pierced Anakin like a blade made of light and shadow. The Jedi offered nothing. Palpatine offered everything. And yet still, Anakin hesitated, because he was not evil. Not yet. He still loved. He still hoped. He still believed that the Council might trust him, that Obi-Wan might understand, that someone, anyone, might reach into the darkness and pull him back. But no hand came. Instead, the Council used him. They feared Palpatine's power, yes, but they also feared the boy. They asked Anakin to spy on the Chancellor, to betray the only man who had never treated him like a child. "You will earn our trust," they said. But he heard what they did not say. "You are not one of us. You are a weapon, not a brother." Even Obi-Wan, dear Obi-Wan, walked the line of loyalty and silence. He tried to help. He tried to reach him, but duty always came first. And love, once again, was left in the shadows. So Anakin turned inward again, and the dreams did not stop. They grew sharper, more violent. Her cries clearer, the agony more real, the moment of death more inevitable. The Force was not warning him. It was laughing. He began to speak to Padme in fragments. He told her not to worry. He promised protection. But behind his eyes, the storm raged. He was drowning in a sea only he could feel. And the Jedi told him to swim alone, and still. He believed he could save her. All he needed was more power, more than the Jedi would give, more than the Order allowed, more than light could offer. And in the shadows, the dark began to whisper, "You were not born to follow. You were born to rewrite fate. You were not the chosen one of the Jedi. You were the chosen of the Force. Itself, it does not want peace. It wants balance, and balance is not serenity. Balance is a blade." Anakin stood now between two towers, the temple and the palace. One offered doctrine, the other offered destiny, and above them both, the Force spiraled like a dying star. It had chosen its instrument, and that instrument had begun to fracture not into weakness, but into purpose, because he had seen her death, and death, in his hands, would soon become optional. Chapter 5. The Chancellor and the Serpent's Tongue. He sat atop the galaxy, veiled in light, cloaked in trust, Palpatine. A man, yes, but more than man. Something older moved behind his eyes. Something patient, something ancient. The last echo of 1,000 years of silence. And now it spoke again through him. He was Chancellor in name, but God in shadow. The Republic bowed to him, not in fear, but in comfort. He offered peace as he carved war into the stars. His words were warm, his eyes were kind, his voice always calm. A serpent beneath the garden, and Anakin he listened, not because he trusted the Chancellor, but because he needed him. Because Palpatine offered what the Jedi refused to name: control over death, over fate, over the dreams that clawed at Anakin's sleep. They met in secret chambers, above Coruscant's endless lights. The war raged below. But up here, above it all, they played a quiet game. Word against word, mask against mask. Palpatine spoke of the Force, not as mysticism, but as choice. He spoke not of balance, but of domination. The Sith, he said, had been misunderstood. They sought freedom from the tyranny of Jedi denial, from the chains of forbidden knowledge. He told Anakin of Darth Plagueis, a name not spoken in Jedi archives, a shadow erased from history, a Sith Lord so powerful he could stop death, could create life, could bend the Force to his will and laugh at the natural order. He whispered the legend as if reciting scripture, and Anakin, eyes wide, heart pounding, drank every word like a man lost in a desert who had found water. But the tale ended in betrayal. Plagueis was killed in his sleep, by his own apprentice. That was the Sith way. Power taken, not given. Destiny seized, not earned. Anakin asked, "Is it possible to learn this power?" And the answer came like a blade sheathed in silk. Not from a Jedi. The Council's suspicions grew. They felt the tremors in the Force. They knew the Chancellor's hands reached too far, held too much. And so they called upon Anakin, not as a brother, not as a peer, but as a tool. Spy on him, watch him, report back. And the fracture deepened, stood between two truths, both false. The Jedi feared power. The Sith embraced it. But neither saw the boy who had once knelt in sand, who had once prayed for his mother's freedom, who now prayed to save his wife from the death the Force had already written. He had power, but not enough. He had knowledge, but not answers. And Palpatine waited, always waiting, always gentle, always near. "You know you deserve more," he said. "You know they fear you. They have never accepted you as one of their own. You are the only Jedi with no equal." And it was true. Anakin had surpassed his masters. He was more powerful than any Jedi of his age, perhaps of any age. But still they held him back. Still they whispered. Still they doubted. The council offered him a seat, but no rank. Master, in title, but not in spirit. A hollow gift, a test, an insult, and he felt it. The stirrings of something old, older than the Jedi, older than the Sith, the Force itself, recoiling, rewriting. The visions came more often now. Podden dying, his child crying, his own hands covered in blood. He could not breathe, not through lungs, not through the code, not through the chains of a system that praised peace but bred hypocrisy. And in the dark, the serpent coiled closer. "I can teach you." That was all it took. Not command, not temptation, only offer. "I can teach you what the Jedi never will." He did not say how. He did not need to. The seed had bloomed. The Jedi wanted obedience. The Sith wanted destruction. But Anakin wanted control to change the future, to defeat the grave, to bend the Force not through surrender, but through will. He had obeyed his entire life. He had believed, but belief had taken his mother. Now it would take his wife, unless he changed everything. He did not turn that day. No vow was made, no blade drawn, but something shifted. The Chancellor's tongue had touched his soul, not with lies, but with permission and the Force. The Force listened, and for the first time it did not resist him. It waited because it knew it had found not a Jedi, not a Sith, but a singularity, a fracture that could no longer be sealed, a chosen one, not to fulfill prophecy, but to shatter it. Chapter 6. The temple burns, and the sky screams. The day began in silence. But silence is not peace. It is the breath held before the scream. In the temple, the Jedi moved like statues, carved from tradition, still believing. Their order stood eternal, blind to the storm that had already breached their gates. They spoke of shadows, but they had never truly seen the night. And far above them, in the Senate chamber, darkness took its final shape. He named it order. Palpatine unveiled himself, not in fury, but in logic, not in madness, but in clarity. The Republic had become empire, the war a pretext, the Senate a stage. The Jedi traitors, the Sith, no longer whispered, they declared. And beside him, standing as flame to his thunder, was Anakin Skywalker, or what remained. He had not turned in rage. He had not fallen screaming. He had chosen. He had chosen power over doubt, certainty over questions, and death over destiny. They called him Vader, not as a title, as a truth. And the first blade he ignited was not on the battlefield, but in the temple that had raised him. He marched up the steps, not alone. Clones followed, brothers in armor, soulless beneath it. The defenders of the Republic became executioners by command, and the temple opened its doors to him. The Jedi were not prepared. They were not ready. They had trained for war, not betrayal. They fell not in glory, but in confusion. Some did not fight. Some begged. Some knew the truth too late. Vader did not hesitate. He cut through masters, knights, Padawans, younglings. He walked the halls like death given form. His saber hummed not in fury, but in finality. He remembered these halls. He had studied here, slept here, dreamed here. Now he painted them in blood. And the Force did not cry out. It absorbed it. It fed that the holocrons burned. The archives fell. Scrolls turned to ash. Lightsabers clattered to the floor, still humming. And in the high tower, the sky turned red. The galaxy shifted OBI-1, far away, felt the shiver. Yoda, on the edge of a dying world, clutched his staff and wept without tears. The Chosen One had become the blade, not to destroy the Sith, not to save the Jedi, but to erase the balance entirely. He was not the fulfillment of prophecy. He was its correction. Padmé swear, felt. The cold, the whispers, the ache. Her husband, her love, her Anakin was fading, but not vanishing, changing. And she knew, not through proof, but through pain, that something sacred had broken. The temple burned for hours. The sky turned black with smoke. The holiest place in the galaxy became a tomb. And the children did not scream for long when it was done. He stood at the center, alone, surrounded by the echoes of what had been not a warrior, not a Jedi, not yet a Sith, something. In between, something worse. Vader, the man who had died to save her, now killed to protect the vision of her survival. And still, the fear remained, because the dreams had not stopped. Palm still died. Even after all this, all the betrayal, all the fire, all the death, the Force still showed her end. And that was when the truth became unbearable. He had done everything. Everything, and the future still bled. He had burned the galaxy to change fate. But fate was not bending. It was watching and smiling. The temple's last ember faded, and above Coruscant, the sky that once glittered with starships and hope, now hung heavy with ash dot. The age of Jedi was over. The Empire was born, and in its first heartbeat, the Force held its breath again, not in mourning, but in anticipation, because balance had not been restored. It had been murdered. Chapter 7. Baptized in ash and Mustafar fire, there is a place where the stars weep molten sorrow. Mustafar. A world of flame, of endless burning, where the crust of creation peels like scabs beneath volcanic blood. The air chokes, the ground moans. The sky bears no softness, only heat, as if the Force itself once screamed here and never stopped. And this was where he went. Darth Vader, still draped in Anakin's flesh, still whispering her name, Palpatine, sent him there not just to kill, but to cleanse. The Separatist leaders had gathered in hiding, sheltered by war's illusion of distance. But there was no distance from fate. The Sith Lord arrived like judgment with a golden saber, and they rich, powerful pawns died not as rulers, but as animals. He slaughtered them without feeling, without hesitation, without blinking. He looked into their eyes and saw nothing worth sparing. They were the architects of chaos, the kindling for war, but they had not started the fire. He had, and when it was done, when the last of them lay curled and lifeless against the glow of lava, he stood alone on the blackened steel floor, the shadows flickering like tongues. His eyes no longer carried the soft sky of Tatooine. They had darkened, hardened, burned But the fear still remained, because the fire outside could not drown the fire within. Palmed had not yet been saved, and so he waited. He stood among the dead, staring out at a world without mercy, believing this act, this massacre, was the final sacrifice required to change what the Force had already written. But the Force does not bargain. It records Pam came, not with soldiers, not with war, with love. She descended through smoke, cloaked not in armor, but in hope. She had come to speak, to understand, to pull him back, and for a moment, a breath, the fire stilled. He ran to her, he held her, he wept into her neck. The boy within him begged, silently, "Tell me I am still worthy. Tell me I have not lost everything." But love, when met with horror, cannot always endure. She begged him to leave with her, to run, to be the man she married. But that man was already dead. He had died in the temple. He had died in the Senate chamber. He had died in his sleep beside visions that bled through dreams. And now, in his place, stood Vader. She spoke of Obi-Wan. He heard only betrayal. She spoke of peace. He heard only threat, because to a man drowning, even a hand reaching to save him looks like an attack. And in his fear, the same fear that once broke on Tatooine, the same fear that bled in the council halls, the same fear that whispered her death over and over. He chose to strike. He choked her, not with hatred, with desperation. He held her throat in the Force, pleading without words, demanding she understand. He loved her. He had done this for her, so why couldn't she see? Her eyes, wide with disbelief, with pain, slowly dimmed. She collapsed. He released her, shaking, horrified. But the damage had been done. Her body fell like prophecy made flesh. And in the roar of lava beyond the window, the Force exhaled. He had become what he feared. And then Obi-Wan stepped from the ship, brother, mentor, enemy, the man who had trained him, who had raised him, who had failed him. And the final fracture began. They spoke with voices sharp as blades, accusation, pain, grief wrapped in armor, and then silence, then sabers. The duel was not a battle. It was an autopsy of brotherhood, of love, of everything they once believed in. They fought across molten bridges, against the howl of a planet that reflected their rage. They screamed, they wept, they bled, not through wounds, but through memory. Obi-Wan did not fight to win. He fought because he had no choice. And Vader fought because he had already lost. And in the final moment, when the high ground held truth and inevitability, the blade fell, limbs were severed. The monster was left crawling, burning, screaming. Obi-Wan looked down. He could not finish it. He walked away, with tears, with shame, with failure carved into his soul. And behind him, Vader burned. The fire claimed him. The flesh bubbled, the eyes boiled. The screams echoed through the Force like dying stars. But he did not die, because the Force was not done with him, because Palpatine, the spider in the web, arrived and took what was left. Flesh was replaced with metal, voice with machinery, face with a mask. And in the rebirth, the last of Anakin Skywalker vanished. Vader awoke not with breath, but with mechanical rage. His first question, is she safe? And the answer, carefully delivered, falsely shaped, ended all that remained of mercy. She is dead, you killed her. And in that moment, the scream was not just pain. It was the sound of the Force shattering. Chapter 8. A Mask Made. Of grief, a voice forged in steel. There are deaths that end breath, and there are deaths that end being. Anakin Skywalker died screaming, not from wounds, but from truth. He had killed her, Podmum, his star, his reason. He had reached into the storm to save her and become the storm that ended her. Now only Vader remained. Not a name, not a man, a construct, a casket. A soul embalmed in hatred and welded shut. His body was rebuilt, piece by piece, not by healers, but by engineers. They crafted armor not for protection, but for submission. A suit that hummed with pain. A voice that rasped with regret. He awoke. In metal, he rose in fire. He breathed through machines that choked every memory of who he had been. The galaxy looked upon this black figure and saw strength, fear, authority, but beneath the mask was grief. The suit was a tomb, and the man inside was not living. He wandered through hallways where voices echoed in fear, not respect. He followed orders not with faith, but with nothingness. Palpatine called him apprentice, but Vader knew what he truly was. Property, the Sith. Promised freedom, but he had only changed masters. He had traded the chains of the Jedi for the shackles of the Empire. And yet, he obeyed, because there was nothing else left. Not hope, not forgiveness, not love, only purpose. And that purpose was death. He hunted the survivors across the stars. He stalked the remnants of the Jedi Order, those who had escaped the purge, who dared to light their sabers again, who still spoke of balance and peace. He silenced them. Each blade he extinguished was a breath against the pain. But pain cannot be undone with more suffering. He killed because it was what remained. He killed because it was simple. The armor marched through citadels, through catacombs, through broken temples. The voice, metallic, inhuman, echoed through dying systems. You cannot run, you cannot hide. You will join the forgotten. The Jedi, once legends, became myths, then rumors, then ash, and still, the mask remained. It never came off, not in battle, not in meditation, not even alone, because behind it, there was nothing left to show. He did not mourn, he did not remember, he did not forgive, but sometimes he dreamed, in the shadows of his chamber, when the machines grew quiet and the galaxy forgot to scream. He saw her, Podme, smiling, alive, holding a child whose name he would never know, and in those fleeting fragments he felt again, not warmth, not peace, only loss, the kind that poisons, not heals. He reached for her, always, but his hands were not hands, they were weapons, and love cannot be held by war. He awoke every time with silence. He never spoke of the dreams, because they were not dreams, they were punishments. The Force, still watching, still waiting, whispered only in echoes now. It had not abandoned him. It had entombed him, not to torture, but to preserve, because it knew what he did not, that the prophecy was not yet fulfilled. That balance is not a moment. It is a cycle, and the cycle had not ended. He believed his story had closed, that redemption was for others, that death would come only as release. But somewhere, far away, beneath twin suns, a child was growing, a boy strong with the Force, pure in heart, unbroken by war, and the Force began to shift again, not loudly, not yet, but enough. The galaxy still feared him. The Emperor still used him, but the dark side had grown heavy, and even Vader, who had destroyed worlds, slaughtered innocents, silenced the Jedi flame, even he began to feel the weight, not guilt, not sorrow, something worse, doubt, and the mask, that sacred tomb, began to tighten. Chapter 9. Whispers, beneath twin suns far from the Empire's cold breath, beneath a sky that burned not with fire, but with memory. Two suns hung in silence, Tatooine, the cradle of the chosen one, the grave of innocence, a desert that remembers every scream it ever heard. It was here that the Force began again, not with prophecy, not with power, with a boy. He was not raised in temples, not trained by masters. He knew no code, only dust, and quiet Luke Skywalker, a name still unknown to the galaxy, but already written in the marrow of the Force. He ran through dunes once, crossed by his father's bare feet. He gazed at stars once dreamed of by the slave boy who would become a storm, and the Force, so long bound in chains of fire and steel, stirred, not loudly, not yet. It whispered through the sands, through the bones of krayt dragons, through the silence of old Jedi graves, buried in the canyon rocks. Obi-1 watched from exile, no longer a master, no longer a warrior, just a shadow with a name he carried, guilt like a second skin. He spoke to ghosts, he listened for signs, and he watched the boy, the son of the man he failed, not to train, not to defeat, to save, because Obi-Wan knew Vader was not dead. He walked still, and where Vader walked, death followed. But here, on Tatooine, life had returned. A new Skywalker, not chosen by the Council, not forged in war, not burned by prophecy, but born. The boy knew nothing of legacies. He dreamed of ships, of flight, of leaving the dust behind. But dreams are not safe. They are seeds, and the Force had already begun to water them. Elsewhere, Vader hunted rebels. Palpatine built an empire not of order, but of obedience. Planets bowed. Systems died, but the future had slipped through their fingers, because the Force had placed its hope not in strength, but in stillness. A farm boy with his father's blood and his mother's heart, he would hear the call. He would find the saber, he would touch the fire, but not yet. The suns still watched, the sand still waited, and the Force, timeless and cruel, whispered to itself, balance is not broken. It is merely delayed, because destiny does not forget. It waits, and soon, so very soon, father and son would meet, and the galaxy would hold its breath once more. Chapter 10. The son finds the father. The father sees a ghost. The galaxy turned, and in its slow turning, stars aligned, not by accident, not by chance, by design. For destiny is not a path walked, it is a spiral, and all spirals lead to the center. The boy Luke had left his desert cradle, called by war, pulled by death, guided by ghosts. He found a saber not forged for him, but waiting for him. It called to him with a voice long buried, an echo of a man who once believed in light, before he was swallowed by it. The weapon had once been Anakin's. Now it sang to his son, and in the cold halls of the Death Star, that echo became a storm. Vader felt him not through sight, not through records, through the Force, like breath inhaled. After drowning, like light behind a closed eye, he searched, he hunted, not with rage, with recognition. There was something in this boy, something not trained, but remembered. A presence Vader had not felt since. No, not since himself. He did not yet know the name, but the blood knew. The sabers clashed, blue against red dot, and in the clash, the ghost returned Anakin, Not fully, not yet, but in the cracks of the mask. The man stirred because the boy did not fight with hate. He fought with hope, and Vader had not seen hope in years. He defeated the boy easily, effortlessly, but he did not kill him. Why? He told himself it was strategy, a trap, a path to draw out the rebels. But truth whispered another reason. Because in that moment, he did not see an enemy. He saw a mirror, and it terrified him. He offered the boy a place at his side. Together, they could destroy the Emperor. Together, they could rule. But that was not the offer of a Sith. That was the plea of a father who had forgotten what love felt like, and now remembered. Luke refused. He fell into the abyss, choosing death over darkness, and still, Vader felt no triumph. Only silence. The boy escaped. The galaxy called him hero, but Vader knew the truth. The cycle had begun again. This was no ordinary rebel. This was fate reborn, and for the first time since Mustafar, Vader wondered, was this the prophecy reawakened? Was the chosen one not himself, but his son? The thought festered. It pulsed beneath the armor. It crawled through the circuits and into the soul. Could he kill him? Would he, or worse? What if the boy saved him? What if there was still something left? Palpatine saw the fracture forming. He fed it, watched it, prepared for it. The Sith feared only one thing, not death, but failure. And the Emperor had trained his apprentice to be powerful, loyal, merciless, but never free. The son had touched something ancient, something forgotten, compassion. And compassion was a crack in the armor that even the dark side could not fully seal. Vader returned to his ship. The stars still burned. The war raged on. But inside the mask, inside the machine, something human moved. Not loudly. Not yet, but enough. Because for the first time in many years, Vader was afraid. Not of death, not of rebellion, but of recognition. Because when he looked into Luke's eyes, he saw Padme, Chapter 11. The Emperor demands a son, the father feels. The spark the throne sat at the heart of shadow, not adorned with jewels, nor crafted with ceremony. It was a wound carved into the galaxy's soul, black stone, eternal lightning, and silence made into shape. Here sat the Emperor, not ruler, not man. Wound, his voice did not echo. It burrowed, his words did not persuade. They infested, and beside him, always, stood the blade he had crafted, Darth Vader. Yet cracks cannot be welded with fear alone. He had seen the boy, Luke, bright as dawn, stubborn as Skywalker, and Palpatine, old serpent, ancient rot, knew what it meant. He saw not a threat, but an opportunity, not the end of his reign, the continuation, a younger vessel, a stronger will, a new apprentice, born of the old. He spoke little to Vader, but he watched him now, closer than before. He tasted hesitation in his voice, delay in his strikes. The boy had reached him, not fully, not yet, but the seed had split the stone. So Palpatine set the pieces. The trap was crafted in shadow and spectacle. A second Death Star, a final battle, a temptation hidden in plain sight. Bring the boy to me. That was the command. Vader obeyed, as he always had. But something within him flickered. Not rebellion, not treason, something far more dangerous to a Sith. Memory. He remembered Padme's hands, Obi-Wan's voice, his mother's grave, and now his son's eyes. Luke came willingly, not as a warrior. As a son, he did not raise his blade. He offered. Truth, there is still good in you. The words struck deeper than any saber. They were not an attack. They were an invitation, and Vader, who had not known mercy in years, felt his grip loosen, but the armor held. The voice, still cold, replied, "It is too late for me, son." He brought Luke before the Emperor, and the trap closed. Palpatine spoke, not with haste, but with ritual. He promised power. He promised purpose. He promised freedom. Luke resisted. He would not strike in anger. He would not fall as his father had. And Vader watched the boy tremble, watched the lightning gather, watched the darkness reach. And in that moment, the Force held its breath, because Vader was not just witness, he was choice. He had obeyed all his life, as slave, as Jedi, as Sith. Now at the edge of destiny, he hesitated. The Emperor unleashed his wrath. Blue lightning twisted through bone. Luke cried out, not in anger, in pain. Vader stood still. Then the boy's scream broke through the years. "Father, please." The word cut deeper than any blade. Not Vader, not Lord, not monster, Father. And in that instant, the mask cracked. Not in metal, in will. The man beneath stirred. The Force surged, not in darkness. In balance, the choice was made in silence. No prophecy, no warning, just truth. He lifted the Emperor. The master who had forged him, the voice that had commanded him, the lie he had lived. He lifted him and threw him into endless light. The scream did not echo, it was erased. The throne fell. The master died, and the war within him ended. But balance does not come without price. The lightning had burned through him, the machines that held him failing, the breath he did not own fading, and he collapsed. Luke caught him, held him, not as Jedi, not as soldier, as son. And the boy removed the mask. For the first time in decades, air touched the face of Anakin Skywalker, pale, scarred, human. He looked into his son's eyes, not with sorrow, with peace. "You were right," he said. "There was good in me." He smiled, not as a warrior, not as Vader, as Anakin, and then he was gone. But death is not the end in the Force, not for the chosen. Chapter 12. Ashes of the Father, light of the Son, the fire rose quietly. No crowd gathered. No hymns were sung. No temple bells rang. There was only the forest, the stillness, and the pyre, the armor that had crushed stars, the mask that had haunted dreams. The shell of Darth Vader now lay upon wood, waiting for flame. Luke lit the fire himself, not as Jedi, not as warrior, as a son. He said no words. There were none left to say. The blaze did not roar. It whispered. Orange light danced across the trees, reaching toward the stars above, as if the heavens leaned close to watch. He had brought his father back, not through battle, not through argument, through love in the final moment. Anakin had chosen light, not for himself, but for his son, and in that choice, the Force had shifted. The prophecy had always spoken of balance, of one who would destroy the Sith and bring equilibrium to the living Force. It had never said how, it had never said when. The Jedi believed the Chosen One would save their order. The Sith believed he would rule the galaxy. They were both wrong. The Chosen One destroyed both. And in the ashes, truth was born. Balance is not order. It is not control. It is choice. Anakin Skywalker was the storm. Luke Skywalker, the calm. After the Son had carried the Father's name through fire and war, and emerged, not corrupted, but cleansed, he did not seek power, he did not crave revenge, he sought only light, and the Force, at last, rested in the silence beyond the funeral pyre. Something stirred, a shape in the glow, a figure in white and blue. Anakin, not the warrior, not the shadow, the man, whole, young, free, a spirit woven from light. Watching his son with eyes no longer heavy, he stood beside Obi-Wan, beside Yoda. No bitterness, no chains. He had returned, not to command, but to witness, to see, at last, the galaxy move without him. The war was over. The darkness had broken. But the story would echo forever, because the Force does not end. It cycles. The Son of the Chosen One now bore the legacy, not to fulfill it, to redeem it. And the stars above Endor shone a little brighter, not for the victory, not for the rebellion, for the balance. Chapter 13. The Forgotten Codes of Light and Shadow. The fire had faded. The armor had turned to ash. The war had ended. But endings are illusions. For even in victory, the Force waits, it remembers. There were codes once etched into temple walls, sung in whispers before battle, meditated upon in silence. Codes of light and shadow, Jedi and Sith, beliefs made into law, laws made into chains, and all of them broken. The Jedi Code had taught detachment, but love destroyed a Sith. The Sith Code praised freedom, but its servants died enslaved. Both had tried to control the Force, and the Force had punished them. Now only whispers remained. The temples were ruins, the archives scattered, the masters gone. But beneath that ruin, fragments stirred, not truths, questions. What is balance? Is it peace? Is it justice? Or is it understanding? Luke Skywalker, now alone, stood at the edge of these questions. He felt the burden not of victory, but of inheritance. He had no counsel, no code, only memory of a father redeemed, of friends lost, of battles won but never finished. The galaxy cheered, crowned him hero. But inside he searched for meaning, because the light had returned, but so had the silence. And in that silence, the Force breathed. It called him away from the crowds, from politics, from monuments. It pulled him to forgotten places, worlds untouched by war, caves where ancient voices still lingered in stone. He listened, and what he heard was not the voice of the Jedi, nor the whisper of the Sith, but something older, the raw heartbeat of the Force, itself wild, unchained, watching it. Showed him visions, not of power, but of cycles. Fall, rise, fall again. Always there had been those who claimed to control it, and always they failed. He began to see the codes for what they were, attempts to define the infinite, and so Luke began to unlearn, not to abandon what came before, but to rebuild from silence. He trained not armies, he gathered not disciples. He studied, he searched for truth, and in the quiet, the Force began to shift once more. Because Luke was not just a Jedi, he was the first of something new, not light, not dark, but balance. Walking, the spark Anakin had ignited, Luke now carried, not as fire, as seed. The old ways were gone, but the galaxy still turned, and in distant stars, new darkness brewed, because the Force does not forget, and those who seek power will always return. But this time, the story would not begin with fear, that would begin with awareness. Chapter 14. Shadows born from peace does not last. It never has. Because peace is not the absence of war, it is the pause between questions. And in the stillness after the Empire's fall, the galaxy began to ask who will lead. Who decides what justice is, what rises when the darkness retreats? Luke watched this unfold from afar. From silence, he saw senators claw for control. Worlds demand vengeance. Old powers resurface beneath new names. The rebellion had won, but victory is not purity. It is compromise. The new republic tried to rebuild, tried to forget, but memory is not a wound, it is a map. And through that memory, darkness began to stir again. Not loudly, not yet, in whispers, in dreams. In bloodlines, Luke, now teacher, now seeker, had begun to rebuild what had been lost. A new Jedi Order, but it was not like the old. He taught them not to sever emotions, but to understand them, not to serve a council, but to serve the Force. Sought students who listened, who questioned, who walked not as warriors, but guardians of balance. But the past is a shadow that clings, and from that shadow, a child was born. Ben Skywalker, blood. Organa wisdom, Solo defiance, a vessel of strength, of potential, of legacy, and within him the Force stirred too deeply, too loudly. Luke saw it, not at first but in time, a darkness buried beneath promise. Not Sith, not yet, but curious, hungry. The boy was powerful, too powerful, and power, even with good intentions, invites fear. Luke feared, not Ben himself, because he had seen what Skywalkers become. He had watched the fall, held the ashes. He had burned the armor, and now he saw it again, in Ben's eyes. The same storm, and one night, one breath between destinies. Luke stood over the boy, lightsaber in hand, not to strike, not to kill, to consider, to hesitate, but hesitation is a fracture, and fractures grow fast. Ben awoke. He saw the blade, he saw the fear, and something broke in both of them. The student turned against the teacher. The temple burned. The other students died. Some followed Ben. Most did not survive, and from that fire, the galaxy shuddered again. The order was broken, not by enemies, by its own blood. Luke vanished, not in death. In shame, he turned away from the Force, from teaching, from hope, because the cycle had returned, and he no longer believed it could be stopped. The boy was gone, and in his place, Kylo Ren, not Sith, not Jedi, a wound, walking. The shadows had returned, not from the ashes of the Empire, but from the bones of the Skywalkers. Chapter 15. The bloodline cursed by Balance. The Skywalker name was once spoken with reverence, then with fear, now with silence, because the blood had never brought peace, only storms. Anakin, Luke, Ben, 3 names, 1 wound, passed like a flame that burns every hand it touches. The Force had chosen them. But choice is not mercy. Ben Solo had been born into light, but the darkness was already watching. It whispered to him in dreams, not with threats, with understanding. You are powerful. You are destined. They fear you because they know. And he listened, because the galaxy had made promises to his family and broken them all. His grandfather had fallen. His uncle had failed. His parents had sacrificed. And what remained? Expectation. They wanted him to be a Jedi, to be balance, to be legacy. But he was still a child, and children grow in the direction of the voices that speak loudest. The voice that called him was ancient. It came from beyond death, beyond space, a whisper through old Sith remnants, scattered like poison seeds. Palpatine. Not dead, not gone, only buried, waiting. His spirit lingered, fractured, held together by hatred and Sith ritual. He saw in Ben a vessel, a continuation, a Skywalker without the chains of compassion. Ben became Kylo, not in ceremony, in loss. He killed his past, or tried to. He shattered his saber, burned his name, turned his face into a mask, a tribute not to who he was, but who he had chosen to become. He bowed to Snoke, a puppet, a shadow, a mouth for Palpatine, and the galaxy felt it. The Skywalkers had fallen again, but the Force, eternal, patient, shifted once more in the ashes of war. Another child rose, a girl, not of blood, of choice, Rey. Scavenger, orphan, no name, no heritage. And yet, she heard the same call. The Force reached for her, not with certainty, but with curiosity. She was untrained, unclaimed, untouched by Jedi or Sith, and yet her presence echoed. She did not seek power. She sought belonging, and in that longing, the Force responded. She found the saber, the same saber, Anakin's blade, Luke's blade, the blade that had killed, saved, and mourned. It chose her, and Kylo felt it, not as threat, as reflection. She was what he had been before. The lies, before the fire, they met in battle, again and again, and with each clash, something deeper stirred, because Rey, nameless, carried light, and Kylo, born of heroes, carried grief. They were not enemies. They were mirrors. The Force had bound them, not as tools, as balance, a dyad, not prophecy, not design, instinct, not two halves, not of war, of wholeness. But Kylo could not see it. Not yet, because his name still burned, and the shadow of Vader still loomed behind every breath. He was told he was legacy. He had become regret, and Rey. She offered not battle, she offered a hand, but he could not take it, because to do so meant facing everything he had done. The bloodline twisted once more, and the Force watched, waited, because balance is not peace, it is reckoning. Chapter 16. The rise, that was never meant to be there, was a time when the galaxy held its breath, not in fear, in uncertainty, because something unnatural had risen. Palpatine, not as memory, as monstrosity, he had returned, not in flesh, but in defiance of death, cloned body, shattered soul, eyes that had watched empires fall and rise again. He had not returned to rule. He had returned to devour. He had watched from the shadows, through Snoke, through fear, through Kylo, and now he summoned the final order, a fleet not of war, but of extinction. His voice thundered across the stars. Let the Sith rise again. But the Sith had never ended. They had waited, buried in ancient cults, carved into forgotten stone, whispered in tombs where the light dared not tread, and now, through one last vessel, they would consume. But the Force had already chosen its answer, not at Skywalker, and no one. Rey. She journeyed across the remains of myth, Endor, Octu, Exegol. She faced the truth of her blood. Palpatine, the name itself, a curse. a chain forged in genocide. She was not born to light. She was forged in shadow, and yet she chose. She stood not as heir, not as Sith, not as Jedi, but as herself, because balance is not birthright, it is decision. Palpatine offered her the throne. "Strike me down," he said, "and my spirit shall pass into you." He had done it before. He would do it again, but Rey refused, because she had seen what power consumed. She had looked into Kylo Ren's eyes and seen not a monster, but a boy who wanted to return. And so she reached out, one final time, and this time he reached back. Ben Solo returned, not through redemption, through sacrifice. He threw away the mask. He cast down the blade. He stood beside her, not as heir to Vader, but as the man who refused the past. And in that final battle, two stood against one. Palpatine unleashed death, lightning that tore through the stars, a storm that had ended dynasties, and Rey fell. But in the void, the voices returned, not of Sith, of Jedi. Whispers from beyond. "I am all the Jedi," she whispered, and the Force, not light, not dark, truth answered. The lightning turned. The darkness was consumed by itself, and the last of the Sith died, not by saber, by choice denied. The throne shattered. The temple fell, and balance, true balance, held for a moment longer than before. But death still demanded its due. Ben gave his life to save hers. He held her, he smiled, he faded, Skywalker blood ended. But Rey remained, not as scavenger, not as Seker's witness. The legacy passed not through blood, but through will, and in the silence she buried the sabers. Luke's Leia's dot in sand where Anakin once played. Twin sons watched again. A girl stood alone, and when asked her name, she looked to the horizon and answered, Rey Skywalker, not inherited. Chosen. Chapter 17. Balance is a wound that heals. Slowly the war had ended, again, as all wars do, in silence. The galaxy, vast and scarred, turned its face from fire and looked inward. Ships no longer roared across starfields. No fleets burned cities from the sky. No emperors whispered from shadows. But peace was fragile, because wounds do not close with time. They close with truth, and truth was hard to find. Jedi, Sith, Republic, Empire, words that had once shaped reality were now ghosts drifting between stars. People rebuilt, replanted, relearned how to live without war. But something deeper remained broken. The understanding of the Force itself. The Jedi had thought it light. The Sith had thought it power. But both had claimed it. And the Force does not belong to those who claim it. It is not a weapon, not a scripture, not a reward. It is balance. And balance is not peace. It is the space between extremes. The breath between grief and joy. The silence before the scream. Rey, now alone, now named, wandered these truths. She was no master, no legend, she was a question. And the Force, for the first time in generations, was listening, not commanding. She did not rebuild the Jedi as they had been. She did not seek students to shape. She sought understanding in old ruins, in forgotten temples, in voices that echoed from light and dark. Alike she read the texts. She heard the echoes, and she chose neither path, because balance is not found in robes or thrones. It is found in awareness that light without shadow is blindness, and shadow without light is death. She meditated where Anakin once fell, walked where Luke once doubted, stood where Ben once bled, and she wept not for the fallen, for the cycle, because she saw it now, a loop forever turning, each generation thinking it the last, each prophecy leading to fire. But the fire was not punishment. It was renewal. The Force burns what does not bend, and in the ash seeds awaken. Rey did not carry their legacy. She ended it not by forgetting. By understanding, she buried the sabers, not to hide them, but to honor them. Anakin's, Leia's, Luke's, tools of war. Now memories. She walked forward with none, because the Force is not held. It is followed, and in her silence, in her stillness, the galaxy breathed with her, not because she was chosen, but because she had chosen herself. And that is the balance the Force had waited for, not obedience, not dominance, but equilibrium, a wound, healing. Slowly, Chapter 18, the Force remembers its name long ago, before temples, before sabers, before empires and wars. There was only the Force. It had no sides, no masters, no voice. It was breath, motion, connection. It moved through stars before they had names. It turned the hearts of beings before they understood what hearts were. And in that ancient silence, it had a name, not spoken, felt, but names were lost, because beings forgot. They built codes, orders, armies. They turned the breath into weapon, the silence into command. The Jedi called it light, the Sith called it dark, but neither truly listened. They asked the Force for power, for visions, for victory, but the Force does not answer. It echoes, and those who hear its echo must decide how to shape the silence. The Skywalkers had been its loudest echoes, not saints, not devils, amplifiers. Anakin, the storm; Luke, the calm; Ben, the wound; Rey, the seed. Each had touched something deeper, not the Force as tool, but the Force as truth. Now, in the stillness after fire, Rey sat beneath a sky unbroken by war. She did not meditate. She listened. The Force was not quiet. It sang, not with music. With memory she saw the faces, the choices, the hands that rose and fell and rose again, and she understood. The Force is not divided, it is whole, always was, always will be. The Jedi tried to own its light. The Sith tried to twist its shadow. But the Force is not light, not dark, it is balance. And balance is not peace, it is motion. It is grief held beside hope, love beside loss, power beside surrender. It does not favor, it flows. And now, for the first time in generations, there were no wars, no orders, no masters, only the Force, and one who listened not to control, not to fight, to remember in her stillness. Rey named it again, not in words, in silence, and the Force remembered itself, not as myth, as breath, as the beginning, as the end, as the infinite middle. It is in every choice, every fall, every return. It is the path, and the one who walks it, and so the story ends, not in triumph, not in despair, in balance, a wound, healing, a breath, exhaled, a galaxy, awake and far beyond the stars. The Force waits again,